All right, finally, we've reached part 3 of Lab 8. These are the exercises in which we're going to give you some data and have you generate some data that you'll then go through the input modeling process, just like you'll do next week when you gather real data on the systems that you're modeling for your final project. So the basic outline here, like any other lab, it's 30 points. This is an individual assignment. Do this on your own. And you're going to submit a doc file or docx file that is going to basically have a bunch of histograms, a bunch of fits, and a bunch of justifications for those fits that you made, using the input analyzer very often as a tool to help you get to those fits. So if you're doing this lab in the lab with the TAs there to help you, then I would recommend you get to the point where you can complete all of part 2. Once you've done that, then I feel like you'll be in pretty good shape moving into the input modeling you'll have to do for your final project. So that's your goal. All right, so how is this set up? Well, in part 1, so there are a set, a sheet here, Lab 8 data sheets that you can download on Canvas. And there are 2 sheets in here, these part 1 data sets and these part 3 data, raw data here. And under those part 1 data sets, there's 6 columns, and each one of them has a different set of data that you're going to be doing some fitting for. So basically, for each one of those 6 columns, I want you to find a good fitting distribution, a distribution that you could implement in Arena and simulate outcomes that would be statistically similar to the outcomes that you see in that data set. So for continuous distributions, I want you to report the distribution family and the best fitting parameters. Justify your reasoning with results from rigorous statistical calculations. And so this you can get from the input analyzer if you'd like. You could also go through and calculate your own chi-squared statistics and so on. But you definitely need to justify your reasoning. It is not good enough to say it was the best fitting distribution in the input analyzer. Tell me a little bit more. Say, oh, this distribution, it looks like these data are only positive values. There's never a negative, and so I fit an exponential to them, or the exponential makes sense. Or at least, if you're going to use the input analyzer to do the fit for you, then use the outputs from the chi-squared to help justify your results. You could say, like, even though this might have looked like a particular distribution, the chi-squared test rejected that hypothesis, and so I went with this other distribution that at least I didn't have enough evidence that I could reject. Something along those lines. Justify to me why you made the choice you made. For any discrete distributions, if possible, find a known discrete probability mass function. Is it a Poisson? Is it a binomial? Is it a geometric? Is it a negative binomial? And so on. And justify your reasoning, again, with rigorous statistical calculations, like you did in homework 3. Again, chi-squared analyses and so on. If you can't find a good standard distribution, then report an empirical probability mass function. In other words, estimate the proportions and generate a probability mass function from them. For both types of distributions, show me a histogram of that data. And bonus, 1 point each for each one of these columns, properly overlay a graph of the proposed distribution. So probability density function for continuous, or probability mass function for discrete, and show that it closely matches that histogram. So this is a little more advanced if you've never done this before, because especially in the case of probability density functions, the scale is going to be totally off. The probability density function, might go from 0 to 1,000, but your frequency distributions in your histogram, the highest one might only go up to 30. So you need to be able to figure out how to rescale those. And so I made this bonus, and so you'd have to look that up, but just as a hint, it's going to involve the number of samples and the width of each histogram bin. You can combine the number of samples and the width of each histogram bin in order to properly rescale your distribution functions to lay right on top of that histogram. In part 2, you're going to generate some data yourself. So I want you to go and generate 500 uniformly distributed random numbers between 0 and 1. You can use Excel for that, you can use MATLAB, you can use the input analyzer if you'd like. But they've got to be 500 uniformly distributed between 0 and 1. Then I want you to take those and, say in a second column in Excel, sort them. And once they're sorted, measure the differences between each number in your sorted list. That will give you 499 differences. And my claim here, which you'll verify in this part, is that those differences, those 499 numbers, are going to be exponentially distributed with a mean of 1 over 500. I want you to think about this. This isn't for your lab report, but just think about why that happens. Why does sorting uniformly distributed random numbers and then taking differences between them generate exponentially distributed random variates? Then I want you to take a random variate generator, like we learned to do in lecture E2, to generate 500 random variates that are exponentially distributed with a mean of 8.5. So this is just like, I think, homework D2, but I'm asking you just to generate 500 exponentially distributed random variates with a mean of 8.5. So that'll give you 3 data sets: a uniformly distributed one, an exponentially distributed one that's generated from that uniformly distributed one, and then another exponentially distributed one you generated yourself. Use the ARENA's input analyzer to fit distributions to each of those data sets. Show those fits in your Lab 8 report, and then compare the fitted distributions from ARENA to the expected ones that are listed on here. And again, I'm looking for quantitative measures, and I'm looking for you showing an awareness of those quantitative measures. Finally, in part 3, we need to open up the part 3 raw data here. And these are data that you basically can think of as data taken from a restaurant, a fast food restaurant, where you might order burgers. And so you can see in this data set there's times, and it has the type of event. There's arrivals, and I think eventually you might see, in this case it looks like they only took data on arrivals, but in your data set you might imagine departures. We can see that for this arrival it resulted in so many burgers ordered, and then between these arrivals they generated inter-arrival times. The inter-arrival times here are formatted as minutes and seconds, and then here they're converted into just seconds. This is the column that's probably going to be most useful to you. Now if we go over here, we see that for each 10-minute interval, it counts up the number of arrivals that occurred in that 10-minute interval. So basically you're going to focus on this column, which is the inter-arrival times between every individual customer, and this column, which are the number of customers that arrive in each 10-minute interval. So what do we want you to do with that? Well, I want you to find a good fitting distribution for the inter-arrival times, and I want you to find a good fitting distribution for the number of arrivals every 10 minutes. And I've already mentioned to you where to find those in the sheet. Once you've found a good fitting distribution for these, say using the input analyzer if you'd like, and remember which one of these is continuous and which one of these is discrete. Make sure that drives your choices when doing your fits. Now once you have a good fit for the inter-arrival times and the number of arrivals, then I want you to explain how and why these two distributions relate to each other, and try to use quantitative evidence from your fits to justify your explanation. What I'm saying there is you're going to get a parameter for this number of arrivals, and you're going to get a parameter or parameters for these inter-arrival times. And those two parameters should relate to each other. So, and I've told you how those parameters might relate for at least one example, an airport example, back over in the part 1 of the video. And I want you to demonstrate that relationship, or at least that approximate relationship, here as well. And that's basically the end of the lab experience. So if you have any questions, then feel free to reach out to us, post questions on the discussion, go to see your TAs in the lab or during their office hours. And good luck with that, And I hope you then will feel well prepared for next week when you're actually going to be gathering your own data on the systems that you'll build in your final project simulation models.